Welcome into another edition of the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Karels, and we have got a special guest with us, joining us for the second time on the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. SEC Michael Bratton is here to break down Texas A&M season to this point, the SEC and as a whole. And Mike, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. And I think the last time I was on here, Jimbo Fisher was terrorizing the sidelines there in College Station. So what a difference a coaching change can make. You know what?
You know what I was gonna say, boy, how have the times changed? Last year, when I think it might have been after the Tennessee game that we had you on during the bye week, and things just looked really bleak. And so now a year later, we have you on in better times, and a lot of fun, a lot of fun to get to. Wanted to just start out, kind of, you mentioned Mike Elko, and what have been your thoughts on what he's done so far, the job he's done in his first season at A&M?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's got to be on the short list, I think, for SEC Coach of the Year.
Yeah.
And if not for the Indiana coach, he might be National Coach of the Year. You know, I mean, he has just done a tremendous job. Loving everything that I've seen so far from Mike Elko. Just has A&M playing with an edge again, which is something they've severely been lacking. And even with some players leaving, I mean, it probably helped, you know, some of the guys that left. So, yeah, just wildly impressed. And I think the future is obviously very, very, very bright under Coach Elko. But, you know, I'm not totally surprised because I don't know if you guys saw this, and I took so much heat for this, but I said it on Feinbaum's show during the summer. I said A&M's going to have they're going to finish better than Texas in the SEC standings. And that's going to come because they beat them head-to-head there to end the season. So that's looking pretty good right now, but they still got to finish the deal.
Mike, it's been a weird SEC season, maybe weird for the whole nation. Just a lot of two-loss teams, a lot of tiebreaker scenarios, and you know, people look at A&M and you know they're definitely surprised to see where they're at right now, but they're also maybe skeptical about, hey, who have you played and who are the biggest wins and that kind of thing. How do you kind of land on that when it comes to A&M? How good is this team, and you know, what do you think they may show in these last three games?
Well, quite frankly, I think Texas A&M is as good as anybody in the SEC. But now that might sound like, hey, we're the best team in the country, because I've always thought, and it's a pretty safe assumption, if you're best in the SEC, you're best in the country. I'm not quite sure that's the case this year, and that doesn't mean an SEC team won't win the national championship. But to your point, I mean, it's just been wildly inconsistent. So when I say they're as good as anybody, that means I think they can beat anybody, particularly if the game's at Kyle Field, and I think they could just about lose to anybody. That's just the way it's been. So I certainly think they're right in that mix to win the SEC and perhaps win the national championship. But I am starting to get a little concerned that the injuries are racking up, particularly on the offensive side of the football with the weapons. They may be a little lacking when it comes to some of the elite of the elite in the conference and in the nation. So I think that might do them in by the end of the season. But heck, if you win 10 games and you make the college football playoff, even if you can't go any further than that, I mean, this has to be an A+ season, I would think, for A&M and Coach Elko, and setting up next year, which, I mean, heck, they could still do it this year. But I think next year it's realistic to have a belief that A&M can win the national championship.
Mike, you talk about kind of that fluctuation, right? And you look at just the past couple of weeks, the high of beating LSU and the way that they did, and that night that they had at Kyle Field, and then they go on the road and, you know, slip up against South Carolina. Were you surprised at all by that performance and just how things played out with their loss to South Carolina?
Yeah, and I was particularly surprised by the fact that South Carolina had given up 25 sacks in conference play, just conference play. I mean, their offensive line has not been that great, and I thought that would be a major mismatch for South Carolina going up against Texas A&M. And quite frankly, at times it appeared that it was, but they couldn't get Sellers to the ground. And had they been able to do that a couple more times, maybe that game's a little bit differently. But yeah, I mean, that just goes back to what I was saying. I mean, in the SEC this year, any week, you just don't know who the heck's going to show up. And man, I am wildly impressed with South Carolina. I don't think they're going to make the college football playoff because they have the 3 losses, but they keep beating everybody like they beat who they played here. A&M, obviously, last week. They beat Vanderbilt better than anyone's beaten Vanderbilt this entire season. They completely clobbered Oklahoma, and then Missouri's ranked. Probably shouldn't be, but they are. So if you blow their doors off and then you finish it and you do it to Clemson, I mean, we got 12 teams in the playoff for a reason. Should we not put arguably the hottest team in the country in the playoff? I think we should, but and what they will, I think are two different things.
Yeah, Mike, we've been talking to Elko, and his message has been pretty simple. There's been a lot of chaos. There's been a lot of who knows what will happen in the standings. But for A&M, they went out. They're in the SEC championship, no matter what else happens. And you'd like to think they'd be in the playoff, even if they lose in the SEC championship game. So I guess as far as how you see it playing out, I imagine you'd think they'd beat New Mexico State and probably at Auburn the next week. But how do you see, maybe just looking ahead to that Texas matchup, that playing out from what you've seen from Texas? And you mentioned A&M been a little snake bit with the injuries, but by that point, what are you kind of expecting from that matchup?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was already, I thought, in the offseason, the best game on the calendar for so many reasons. But that was with, if they were both 5 and 6 going into that game, that was my number one game on the list. It just so happens to be they may be playing for the right to go to the SEC championship, maybe playing for the right to go to the college football playoff. So it's just amplified to another degree that I didn't think was physically possible here. So, I mean, what a showdown it's going to be. But I think A&M, despite playing at home, I think they're playing with house money, because I think most people are going to assume they're going to get beat, and that'll be the narrative is, hey, they'll give them a game. They may cover the spread, but Texas is just number 3 in the country or whatever the heck they are. After they'll probably kill, they just killed Florida. Florida's awful. A&M fans know all about that. But, Kentucky, Arkansas, I mean, come on, they're going to kill those teams. So they're probably still going to be 3. They maybe even be 2 or 1, depending on if there's some upsets. So, yeah, I mean, I anticipate most people are going to expect Texas to win that football game, which I think is exactly where Mike Elko is going to want that thing. But as long as they don't show up like they did against South Carolina, I mean, it's going to be a ball game. And I think A&M certainly can win it. I think people have kind of written off A&M after that performance. Why are they not writing off Texas after the Georgia performance? I don't know. But we have short memories, so really want to see what A&M looks like against Auburn. They should kill them. I mean, Auburn's awful too, but going back to what we said, A&M will be a favorite there, probably, but not by a ton. Maybe like 7 points because it's on the road. But it wouldn't be the most stunning thing if Auburn won that football game. I mean, heck, we live in a day and age where Vanderbilt not only beat Alabama, quite frankly, they dominated them for 4 quarters.
Mm-hmm. Got plenty more to get to with Mike on the other side of this break. We're going to take a quick break. If you're listening to us on video, stick with us. If you're listening to us on the podcast, we'll be right back. Welcome back into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. Mike, why did you get your thoughts? You mentioned Texas there and mentioned a little bit about, Georgia and how that game played out. And, it seems like the opinions are kind of all over when people are kind of looking at Texas's schedule, right? And looking at, there are a lot of people asking, well, who have they beaten? And, how have they played so far? Do you think they should be as high as 3, or what were your kind of thoughts when you saw them come out at number 3?
Yeah, I quite honestly, I was surprised by that, but I'm going to give you guys a little a little insight here. I'm trying to get the word out, and I can't take credit for this because this is not me doing it. But my buddy Dave Bartu, CFB Matrix is what he goes by. He has cracked the code. He knows exactly what the playoff committee is going to do, and they're just simply going off a formula. It doesn't matter anything they say. It doesn't matter head to head. It doesn't matter. There's 5 criteria they go off of: strength of schedule, quality wins, top 25 wins, game control, and bad losses. And you could go check it out. I did a live college football playoff ranking reveal and reaction show, and we started it before the official rankings, and I just went through 1 through 15, and he got about 13 of the 15 dead right. And currently it's got Texas number 3. So again, this is just a formula. That's all they're going off of. And then they BS for 30 minutes and try to explain why they got the top 25 the way they have it. But according to this formula, Texas has got 3 quality wins. So that's helping them. But their strength of schedule is 73 based on what the committee is going off of. So it's not a great schedule. And I think that's a fair point. And I think if Texas A&M beats Texas and Texas ends the regular season with 0 top 25 wins, they should not be in the playoff. I don't know how in the world. Same thing with Missouri. I mean, Missouri, if they finish 10-2, I guess they would have a ranked win over South Carolina, but of course beating them, they're probably knocking them from the unranked. With so many good teams, you got to have at least one top 25 win, I would imagine, but maybe just that Texas logo, I don't. They're getting extra credit for something, and I don't quite understand it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Mike, I'm loving just looking into all the different scenarios that can play out, because we really have no idea who could even be in the SEC championship game at the end of the year with all the different tiebreakers and things. But I want to give you a couple scenarios. One with A&M. If A&M makes it to the SEC championship, they beat Texas. They win out the last 3 games. But let's say they get wrecked in the SEC championship game. They lose by 30 to Georgia. Should they still be in the playoff? I think there's a thought of like, 3 losses, or do you count an SEC championship game against a team because, hey, they played the extra game, unlike, some of the 2-loss teams that might not be in the conference title. Do you hold that against them even if it's a blowout loss?
Perhaps, but since you're throwing out hypotheticals, I'll throw one right back at you. What would A&M be ranked going into the SEC championship if they make it? Can you give me a rough estimate here?
I've thought about that. I thought maybe probably 7 or 8.
Yeah, it's definitely top 10, probably 8, 7.
Right. So
Texas and you're 10-2. Yeah, probably 8 or 7.
I think if they're 8, I think they'll be out. I really do. Because again, it's not, especially if they lose by that wide of a margin. I know actually Boise is pretty decent. Well, I don't know how good they are, but their ranking is decent. So this may not technically apply, but it's not the top 12 they're taking. It's generally going to be the top 11. And depending on how or where the ACC champion and the Big 12 champion are ranked, it may only be the top 10 because it's the top 10 and then the highest G5 and then the highest ACC and Big 12. So if you're 8 and you're getting hammered, unless you're staying at 8, unless you drop to just 9 or 10, I don't see how realistic that is, depending on how many other 10-2 type teams are. Like, could they in good conscience put in A&M after a big loss like that if Ole Miss is sitting there at 10-2 and they just killed Georgia, or Alabama at 10-2 who beat Georgia? I mean these are all tough things to weigh, but if you get hammered in the SEC championship, I think that's going to eliminate you. And right or wrong, I mean, fans are going to be mad. Coaches are going to be mad. We may have to change the SEC championship game rules after that, but that's kind of the situation we're in right now.
If they lose close, though, no way you can keep them out, right? If it's like a close, 6-point loss.
Right. See, I think that's a different story for sure. And it's also a different story, I think, if it's like last year where it was Alabama and Georgia. Georgia lost, but clearly I think we could all say they probably deserved a shot But again, they lost that game, so I was actually fine with them leaving them out of a 4-team playoff. But yeah, like in a scenario like that, I think you'd have to put in both those teams.
Yeah.
No doubt. Sticking with the SEC championship game for a second, because you look at all the scenarios, and you mentioned that A&M Texas game could be kind of a de facto playing game, just depending on how things play out. You got Tennessee still in it. You got Ole Miss. I even saw a scenario where I think LSU is still in it if the tiebreakers get really crazy. Who do you kind of think right now, if you had to kind of project who is going to be in that game in Atlanta? Are there two teams that you kind of feel have the best shot?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, there are seemingly like 25 different scenarios right now, but it could be very, very simple. If Tennessee wins this weekend at Georgia, they're in. They're going. If A&M beats Texas, they're going. So it could be. It's just down to 2 games. It could be that simple, but there's no guarantee that happens. I mean, both those scenarios I gave you, Tennessee's a 10-point underdog. A&M's probably an underdog to Texas, even though that game's at Kyle Field. So, it may not be that easy. But to answer your question, who will make it? I'll still give the edge. I'll give the edge to A&M right now. I think they'll get one of the spots, and then the other one. Even though I'm a Tennessee grad, I don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't have a lot of confidence Tennessee's going to go into Athens and beat Georgia. So I wouldn't pick them, but maybe Alabama and A&M.
Mike,
that's a good call.
College football playoff is even harder to predict because it all depends on, okay, does Boise State win out? Does Indiana keep it going? How does the ACC play out? Does Colorado make a big leap and win the Big 12 championship? There's a lot of things that could play out there. But if you just had to kind of set every year there should be this many SEC teams that make it, whether it's a range or an exact number. In a 12-team format, should it be 4? Should it be less? Should it be more? What do you kind of think? And even this year too.
Yeah. That's tough to answer. I'm not a big fan of just a blanket 4, a blanket 5, a blanket 3. I think it really should depend on the season. And like this year, we're talking about how up and down and inconsistent it is. I think you probably deserve more, but there have been years where it's Georgia, it's Alabama, and it's everybody else. In those years, they probably deserve less. So I think you really got to go year by year by year. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's completely fair to say, and I know Indiana's like, that's a fun story. You guys probably know people that went to Indiana that are doing this job with us, because I know about 20 of them. I don't know. I didn't know Indiana was like a journalism juggernaut, but that's the only thing they do better than football, apparently. Yeah. But I also understand people that say, well, hey, put Indiana, give them Georgia's schedule. Let's see how they do. They'd be 5-4 right now. Maybe, you know what I mean? So I get that argument too. But at some point you have to reward teams that are winning. So I don't know. It's a thankless job to pick all these teams, and somebody's always going to be angry. I have no doubt, just looking at my mentions. But this year it does feel like the SEC deserves at least 4, if not 5, because I truly think that 1 through 5, if any of those teams get hot, whether it's an Ole Miss, whether it's a Tennessee, whether it's an A&M, they could win the national championship. So I think they deserve a right to go play for it.
Mike, there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, since it was announced that, we were going to a 12-team playoff, and, the expansion, bringing in Texas and Oklahoma and obviously USC and UCLA and all of them going to the Big Ten. Just what have you thought of this season? Just with all here we are discussing possibilities of how many people are going to get into a 12-team playoff. Just, as a college football fan, as somebody who follows the sport closely, just what's been your impressions of kind of this fall with all the new changes?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. I was getting real tired of these division races. being determined by like November 1st. And then the last month of the season, it seemed like a lot of fans were kind of tuned out already and just already looking ahead to coaching change or recruiting or another sport or what have you. So I certainly get the sense that a lot more fans are tuned in this late in the season, which I think is very refreshing for the sport. And again, I don't think anyone has a clue who's going to win it. And I think that's good too. But I think that has more to do with the portal and NIL than it does the expanded playoff. But just throwing those mixes all together, I think it's good. But where it's possibly going to be bad is with these super conferences, it's getting pretty muddled to determine who should go to the playoff and the imbalances in the schedule. I just talked about Georgia's schedule. You know, all off season, everybody looked at Florida's schedule, and it still is a gauntlet, but they're not even comparable to like Missouri's schedule, Texas' schedule, even Tennessee's schedule is really weak. I mean, how can Georgia have that schedule and Missouri's got that one? I mean, it makes no sense. So it has created some real issues, and I think that's why Greg Sankey is pushing so hard for more teams. I mean, they're probably going to expand the playoff again, which it kind of sickens me to say that, but I truly think that's the way it's going. But who knows, man? It's been so much fun. Maybe that is a good thing. I don't know.
Mike, what do you think about conference schedules? Because there's been a lot of talk that SEC obviously kind of delayed where they want to go with it. And certainly it seems like a lot of people like the 9-game schedule because you get to preserve all the rivalries. But there's also kind of a narrative of like, hey, the more conference games you have, the more your teams are going to eat each other and prevent, maybe you don't have this many 2-loss teams. Maybe there's a lot of 3-loss teams because you had that extra game. We saw it happen with the Pac-12 when they went to 9 games. So I'm wondering how you balance like, hey, let's save this rivalry, but also shouldn't the goal be going to the playoff and, much more than one game? But yeah, I'm curious how you kind of feel on that.
Yeah, it's wild because this is a conversation I ask, anytime I speak with people that are kind of in the know, and it seems to change every 6 months, like a year and a half ago it was, 9 games for sure. Yep. And then about a year ago, it was like, well, about half the conference is against it, so we're going to stay. And then they're dropping all these non-conference games, so everybody assumed, they're going to 9. But you just hit on something critical there. You go to 9, somebody's going to lose these games. And all of a sudden, what do fans really want? They do want the rivalries, and I want them too. But do you want to ensure that you're keeping traditional rivalries, you're playing extra conference games, or you say you want that, but do you want that, or do you want Texas A&M and Texas to be 9 or 10 or 11 win teams when they meet each other at the end of the season? I mean, that's what fans really want. They want wins, and they want these games to be mega games at the end of the season. So that sets you up to get to the playoff. So now what I'm hearing is I think they're going to stay at 8. This isn't fine. Again, I'll tell you, this will change in 6 months. I'm telling you, they keep changing and changing. But what I'm hearing now is they'll stay at 8, and what they're hoping to do is have a scheduling alliance with the Big Ten. So instead of that extra 9th conference game, it'll essentially be with the Big Ten, and that way they can sell that package as a new TV package and make even more money, because they just did the deal with ESPN, and the Big Ten has done it with Fox. So they're not going to get any more money, I don't think, from these television partners. But how do they get it? They get it by selling a one-off essentially that won't hurt your conference standings. And maybe that'll help decide some of these playoff scenarios. And I would think the SEC's got to feel pretty good about their odds, not in every game against the Big Ten, but if you line up 1 through 16, I would imagine the SEC is probably going to be favored in about 13, 14 of those games.
Yeah, something I've wondered, because it feels like there's been such a focus on like you have to play every team every other year. You have to play in every venue once every 4 years. And I just kind of wonder, like, why not just have like keep your core rivalries and don't care as much about playing. A&M shouldn't care about playing Kentucky every other year. Like, who cares if those two teams play every other year? Kind of like the old model where, yes, you're going to have some weird inefficiencies where, you know, A&M still hasn't played Georgia at home. I know it's stupid, but again, if you're trying to prioritize, like, hey, do you want to make the playoff? Do you want to preserve your rivalries? And then do you want to play Kentucky every other year? I would think that playing Kentucky every other year would be last place there. So does it seem like a crazy idea to just have like okay, A&M, you play Texas and LSU and Arkansas every year, and then you rotate the other 5 or whatever it might be? Does that seem like a crazy idea? And I mean, how would you feel if something like that were to happen?
So sounds like you want to go back to divisions.
No, not divisions. It's more of like a pod system.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. But then people are going to complain about their pod. You know what I mean? Like there's always going to be someone that gets the short end of the stick. And one team in particular that I'm thinking of, and well, maybe they're not capitalizing from it, but South Carolina right now, I don't know if you realize this or if, you know, your audience cares at all, but they kind of got screwed with the scheduling because they're used to playing Georgia and Florida every year. And they started to build a nice little rivalry with Tennessee. And they're the closest to Georgia and Florida. Yet for 2 years in a row, they're not going to play them because we got this weird schedule. So there's a lot of teams like that yeah, those will be good rivalries, right? That you'd think you'd put them in a pod, but that's Georgia cares more about Florida. They care more about Auburn. So they're not going to make their pod. So I don't know. There's just oddities all around it, and I don't know who that would be for you know, when they were thinking about doing the permanent rivalries. That I think one of them was like Florida Oklahoma. Like, who cares about that? You know what I mean? But it's like it's because Oklahoma's short one and Florida's short one. So let's just stick these two together. But so yeah, I mean, I really don't know. I mean, that's interesting to think about. I think your model makes sense. But again, I think it'll be unequal for some people, like an Alabama. You know, they were complaining they'd get LSU and Tennessee and Auburn. That's not fair. And Tennessee would get Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Alabama. I said, sign up for that, but they wouldn't do it.
Yep. Yeah, no model's going to make anyone happy, right? Like, or make everyone happy. There's always going to be a weird thing with everything. I would just think the playoff and the rivalries matter the most, and then the other stuff you just kind of figure it out. But I think I don't think what I think matters. I think it's probably going to end up being 9 games, and then, like you said, the Big Ten thing I know has been talked about a lot too, which I think would be pretty cool because you get that extra metric when you're comparing. You know, for the playoff, you could say, well, this is how the SEC did against the Big Ten. I'd imagine that'd be pretty nice as well.
Right, and I think that's key to the whole thing too, because the Big Ten and the SEC obviously are running the sport now, and they're both wanting, you know, we need X amount of teams in. Well, I think this will be a way of kind of like splitting the difference, where, okay, Big Ten wants 5, SEC wants 5. Well, the tiebreaker may be how they did head to head, obviously. So, you know, let's say it's like Ole Miss versus Indiana or something. Like, well, they played back in September. Whoever won that game, they get the playoff bid. I don't know if that's part of the logic, but it would make sense to me.
Mike, we'll get your thoughts on this just to get you out of here. Is there a team that's particularly surprised you this year, or maybe a team around the SEC where you thought I wasn't so sure about them coming into the year and has maybe been a bit of a pleasant surprise?
Oh yeah, I think it's the same answer for anybody that you ask this question, and it's Vanderbilt. I mean, I've never been one of these people that's like, hey, we got to kick them out of the league. But I mean, I was getting close to it. You know what I mean? Like, they were just totally uncompetitive, yet here they are. They are just they're doing what people have suggested Vanderbilt do for so long, but they're not quite going all the way. But a lot of people have said, why don't you just go triple option? That's essentially what they're doing. They're just doing it out of a shotgun with a highly, highly, highly efficient quarterback that, it's not the prettiest when you watch him play, but he's clutch. He's tough as hell. And right now he's my favorite player in the league is Diego Pavia. And I hope he wins his lawsuit so we can get at least another year, if not two more, of Diego Pavia wrecking the SEC and just being a thorn in everybody's side. So, yeah, I love it. And I know people don't care about this. They just care about, whether you win and all that. But a lot of these coaches are like mercenaries. They don't care. They're a lot of them are actually bad people, to be honest with you. But that's neither here nor there. Point being is Clark Lee is a heck of a guy, and he is a Vanderbilt grad, and he had other options, and he stuck it out because he loves that university, and he was tired of them being a laughingstock. So I'm happy for him too. I'm happy that we shouldn't have this super conference with 15 teams that will do anything to have a winning football program, and then Vanderbilt. It's a travesty. But thankfully, they're with their stadium is going to look like $1 million when it's finally complete next season. And now that they have a competitive team, it just adds to the conference.
Mike, two teams I want to ask you about in particular: OU and Florida. You talk about the team that exceed expectations. I don't know if OU and Florida had a ton of expectations going into the year, but it's been a little rough for those two teams. And Florida announces that they're going to bring back Billy Napier. Then they lose by 50 to Texas. OU, there's already talk about, should you bring in Shane Beamer and, that kind of deal. Which team would you rather be right now? And where do you see things going with those? I think A&M playing Florida next year, they're like, oh, great, yeah, bring back Billy Napier. But how do you feel about those two teams right now?
Yeah, and this may be too simplistic, but I feel better about Florida because they have DJ Lagway. And, for all I know, and I don't have any knowledge on this, but, I mean, he can hit the portal and first week of December, and then it's a train wreck again. You know what I mean? So I feel slightly better about Florida, but then I don't feel good at all about old Billy Napier. I think he's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to game day decisions. It's pathetic that they have to have a mat with 12 spots on it so they can run out the right number of people on special teams. I mean, it's just one travesty after another on game day. So. They may have DJ Lagway, but they don't have the right guy running the ship. And apparently the new message is, well, we're going to get a new defensive coordinator, which would be, I think, 4 in 4 years. We're going to hire an offensive coordinator, which Billy Napier's strength is actually play calling. So that, the one good thing he does, let's take that away from him. So yeah, the problem with Florida is they got other fish to fry with the president, the AD, who's, if Billy Napier goes, he's going with him. So how can he not be biased when he's deciding the fate of the guy that decides his? And then, it's just allegations, so innocent till proven guilty. But the basketball coach he's in a little bit of hot water himself. So there's a lot of issues in Gainesville. But man, Oklahoma, buddy, they don't look ready for the SEC, do they? I mean, those fans. Great fans, proud program, but they're a travesty on the offensive side of the football. And if they just had a competent offense, just competent, they'd probably have won 7-8 games. But not only are they not competent, they're pathetic on the offensive side of the football. So I called out when they gave Venables that extension. Why do it? He wasn't going anywhere. No one was going to steal Brent Venables away from Oklahoma. Nobody wanted Brent Venables. And now they've given him a $44 million buyout. Next season is $37, I believe. So, that was just idiotic. I don't feel very good. I thought Napier had a big buyout till I saw Venables' number.
That sounds a little like the A&M conversation from a couple years ago. If only they could, kind of get the offense going, and they got a good defense, and then there's a long extension. It just kind of all brings back visions from another time and another year. So, Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Just a ton of great insight and a great look around the SEC. A little more exciting than talking about New Mexico State. So we thought this was like the perfect week to take a little dive and bring you on. So thanks again for the time and the insight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. Have a good one. Thanks. And to everybody joining, thanks for tuning in. If you like and share this video and make sure to subscribe to get a notification every time a new video pops up. And Carter will have the coverage from Kyle Field this weekend, 6:45 kickoff against New Mexico State on the SEC Network. Till then, have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you guys soon.